How much meaning is lost when you're reading a translation? Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Mortals Book Reviews live here on the 29th of January 2025. I'm your host Kyron, and as you surmise, this is the podcast where I read the same books over and over and over and over again and do the same reviews over and over and over again. No, okay, we don't do that, but I kind of am doing that today in a weird context because I am reading and doing a special episode of translations related to my readings of these two books here, O Alquimista, aka The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I have done a book review on this before, so, basic stuff. It was published in 1988, the original. The translation I have here, I believe, was published in 1993. It's 206 pages in length, or is it 169? We'll have to look into that. And it's probably about 3 hours reading in the both Portuguese and English. I think it probably a bit longer in the Portuguese, actually. Let's say 5 hours. So this episode is going to go over my direct observations from reading a book in the original Portuguese language versus in English and noticing any translation differences between the two. I'll then go on to talk about just some interesting things you will find in translations, just in general, the art of translation, if you want to put it like that I've noticed over a couple of years related to other books that I've read in originals, as well as just things that you might observe in some of the books that I have not read, particularly because of the way it was translated. And then we'll just finish off with just a little bit of a summary on translation notes and things that might help you if you are going to read a book that's translated and you want certain aspects or don't want certain aspects. So let's jump into the direct observations that I got from reading The Alchemist and O Alquimista. Now, as I mentioned, I've already done a book review of this, so link is down below. And my general approach for this was to read the book, O Alquimista, in the original Portuguese, as much as I could, just reading it through. Certain areas I'd stumble upon a word here or there which I didn't know. And for this, I would just use a direct translating tool. Usually it'd just be a verb, but sometimes it would be like, hookah, for example. There's no way I'm going to know what that is in Portuguese. I have not come across that. And so, because there are some specific words in here that are related to, Arabic things, which I just had no idea on. And so even just some ones like lead, which is chumbo, which I'd kind of heard of before, but, didn't really know. I could have gone directly to the other book to get that translation, but I was like, no, I'll just use the general translation tool. When it came across to certain passages, which I thought, oh, that's interesting, I'd want to see how this is in English, then I would go across and I would kind of read the two books side by side, and they literally have the same cover art and things like this. So I had a fairly strong feeling that it would be a good book to read a translation of because it's relatively simplistic, this book. If you've read The Alchemist before or heard of it, it's written in a style that I think, children could get into and is very accessible for a lot of people. Not complicated storyline, not complicated emotions or actions going on. Very, very simplistic. So what did I get from reading these side by side? Well, the first you'll notice is minor stylistic changes. So, for example, does tempo translate as weather or as time? And, it can kind of translate as both. Most of the time you would think that tempo would be time. The context for this was Santiago being grateful for his coat and that you need to be prepared for the surprises of X. Now, it could have also been like change as well. So in this case, it was like the change for be prepared for the surprises of change. And he kind of, it's one of those ones where it's like, it doesn't really make a difference that much of whether it's time, weather, change, it doesn't really matter that much in this context where it's like, it's his coat, he just needs it for something that is going to happen. You'll also be seeing things like boquiaberta versus amazed. instead of open-mouthed. You know, the English translation was amazed. I had personally come across boca aberta, which literally means mouth open. I would have translated that as open-mouthed instead of amazed, but, you know, minor stylistic. Who really cares? Popcorn maker versus baker, for example. You know, it's things like that I don't think have any impact on the way the book is read or what actually happens within it. Traveling east versus traveling west, technically a difference, but does this really change the passage, the feel, the essence of what is going on? I would say no. So one of the things you first start to notice, I think, are these small ones. But then you get to this other area where it's like, okay, you know what, I'm starting to see changes which I think actually are points of note that the translator directly had to make a decision on, and that actually do play an impact in how the book comes across. So, for example, there was this passage, this is probably the most noticeable one that I saw, was there was this passage in the Portuguese right near the start of the book where he was stating that his father, this being Santiago, the main character, that his father tried to bury his desire to travel with water, food, and shelter. And in the essence saying that he wanted to do what Santiago was doing to, you know, live out his personal dream, his personal legend, but he intentionally suppressed this down by, you know, kind of forcefully saying like, oh, I can't travel because I need to create a house and a home for my wife. I need to provide for her. And he was using this as an excuse for not following his personal legend. Whereas in the English, it implies that he had no choice but to suppress his desire for travel because he had these things. You might think this is minor, but I feel it plays into the actual point of the book, which is one of the learnings you can take away from this book is, okay, you need to actively be aware that there are going to be forces and things that will stop you from living out your personal legend, from following your true calling in life. And that some of these you can use as excuses, which is what I think the original Portuguese portrayed better and is what this book is mostly about. Whereas the English version, I think, kind of had the cop-out. It was saying he had no choice but to, whereas no, he actually did have the choice, and they are very pressing and important reasons, but he chose to do it in spite of, and you know, he used them as an excuse almost to not live out his personal legend. Something like that, you know, it's still slightly nitpicking in the grand scheme of the things of the book. If you look at this one passage, it probably doesn't, but I think multiple things like that add up to the sense of the book being slightly different when you come out at the end of it, whereas the things like tempo versus weather, you know, change, those sort of things don't really matter. When the actual sense of the passage is changed, that's when I think, okay, yeah, this is probably where the translator had an impact on this, whether it was good or bad. In this case, in that very example, I would say is a negative one. I can't think of any reason why he would have altered it in that case. We go on to see other sections where Santiago was saying he would help the Englishman if he could in the Portuguese. This being like, I literally can't help you. There's nothing else I can do. Whereas, and it was like a more broader sense. He just didn't know how he could help. Whereas in the English version, he's like, I would, but there's people might not know what an alchemist is like I did. And he's got a much more direct, impactful, this is the reason why. It was more of like a problem solving. So in this case, the intent of Santiago changes as well. And his actions for doing or not doing certain things has changed. So I feel like the changes in this has made the characters come out looking slightly less immaculate in a certain sense, in that both Santiago and his father, I think, were more pure or not pure. They had a bit of a depth of character more in the original Portuguese, whereas in the English translation, they're kind of coming out looking a little bit smoothed over. Their character, they're less of a flawed human being and more of a they're more dictated by the whims of the universe. This book very much is about the universe conspiring or not conspiring against you, and your decision to accept that or not accept that. So these two portions do play into the book, but I would say the English has translated that in a way that's not helpful. In a way that's particularly not helpful is when it just simply cuts out certain sections. So, for example, there was this sentence where Santiago was talking about the Moors, so this being the people from over the seas from where he was in Spain and going into Africa, and he or the Middle East, and he talks about how he's not a fan of them. He doesn't like them. In fact, he detests them. And dropped words were pretty common. I'm really not sure why. One section was they would always be his friends, became they would be his friends. Even in the preface, something gets changed for no reason. It was talking about Oscar Wilde being the author of this book, mysterious book or something, but the English version cuts this out. Those ones kind of just baffle me. I'm not really sure why that happens, and in this case, unless a really obvious reason is present, I don't see benefits for just cutting out certain words or sentences that were in the actual original. Now, the biggest difference with translations and the art of translations is not due to the translator themselves, but due to the actual languages. So after reading these books, I would probably say that of the changes that you'll notice from reading something in the original Portuguese versus in the English, 95% of it is just due to the language differences themselves. So the book length is a really good example of this. You're looking at the two here, and you're saying, Karen, they're about the same length. What are you talking about? There's no real differences. Well, the original English, what you will find in languages is that there is, due just to the inherent nature of the language, the way certain words are conjoined, such as in German, which makes text by word count much smaller, or others which will split up certain words, or to have a word like what is in English becomes o que é in Portuguese. So we see there's an actual additional word in there. And this will blow out word count and make things different in that sense. So we have 100 and 200, and so in general for Portuguese, if you've got something written in English, then Portuguese will be 20% larger, and then, vice versa the way. I don't know what the math works out. It should be like 82% or something like that if in English versus if it's originally written in Portuguese. So we have the original page count in the Portuguese being 206 pages in total. And the English version, it gets us down to like 168, 170-ish. This is also assisted by the actual formatting in the book. So I'm talking about the actual page width, which goes from 9.5 centimeters in the Portuguese down to 9 in the English, and then the 30 lines in the Portuguese down to 29. So we can see that the actual word spacing as well is much larger in the Portuguese, which is assisting in this kind of blowout. The probably biggest difference as well, and this actually gets back into the translation, and probably not even the translator themselves, but the copy editor. I'm not sure the person who actually describes this, but in the English version, they don't really have a delineation of chapters. So that it kind of just flows through as one big total thing. In the Spanish, in the Portuguese, this is very different. It has very delineated chapters, and they occur very frequently. So you get this more feeling of the short, sharp delineation of periods in Santiago's life as he's going through his journey. Whereas in the English, it feels like one much longer journey. I personally actually enjoyed that aspect of it, where in the English translation, where it feels like one continuous thing that goes on, versus the Portuguese, which is like this happens and then mini stop break. You have to take, the 2 seconds it takes for your eyes, or 1 second, or maybe even half a second to travel from the bottom of one page to the next or turn the page over. So I think that actually changes the feel of the book, and that's related more to there's no reason it needed to be like that. Portuguese uses very much a very similar structure to English in terms of the standards. Usually it'll be like 4 sentences in a paragraph, multiple paragraphs in a chapter, ranging from, depending on the book type. In this case, it being 1 to 3 pages usually. One of the other probably big things in this was just it takes a lot of mental energy for the translation if you are not fluent. I'm not fluent in Portuguese. It's okay. I can converse. Wasn't as good as my Spanish got up to, where I could speak relatively without thought and just be in the moment and engage in a conversation. In Portuguese, I still need to mentally go adjust. Okay, that's what this means. Okay, yeah, that's probably what this means. Certain words I'll still stumble over and have to go mentally. Okay, what is tree? Árvore. Okay, yeah, this sort of thing. So those are probably the biggest differences. And from this, I found that the book didn't hit me as hard in the Portuguese or with as much depth and meaning as it does in the English version. So this is where it's like, if you're reading originals versus translations, sure, there's a benefit to reading the original because you get more accurate, word count, or you don't have to have those factors of the differences of word counts, of translation differences that the translator chose to do or whatnot, but you are sacrificing comprehension and knowledge. And in this case, if I had to recommend someone of my particular level, which, if I had to go through it, I'd probably be like A2 level, I think, in terms of skill, maybe crossing into the B1. I would recommend just reading the translation into your native language, and you can really get a feel for that. So let's jump on to the next section. This is some indirect observations I've just gotten from general translations and extra notes. So one of the things I tried reading last year was 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights fame by, I'm not sure who the author was that. I thought it was just various unknown authors. And I, in particular, had acquired a version which was the Edward Lane boulderized version. And if you don't know what boulderized means, it essentially means when it's intentionally altered, I believe, to make it more moral, or to cut out bits which are perhaps immoral or too spicy, something like that. And I personally feel this is what the most egregious thing a translator can do, when they intentionally alter the purpose and meaning for ulterior motives, and when it's related to their own personal morals. So in the Arabian Nights, for example, the 1001 Nights, he was cutting out or changing bits related to genies, related to how Arabs would, family structures were made, of relations between men and women, of sexual related things. Apparently he was just cutting stuff off left, right, and center, altering things, changing things. As soon as I learnt that, because I read a little bit of the book and then I started digging into the actual version I had, and that's a straight up no for me. Like, no. I don't want a boulderized version. I don't want that. So whenever I come across that, I personally stay very, very clear from it, because I don't see any benefit for a translator to put their own morals onto a piece of work. The next category I'd put due to, I guess, like the copy editing and marketing process, and this is probably beyond the translator, where the translator, they've got probably a very decent grasp on both languages that they are translating to / from, and this is where they will have done their translation perhaps to the best ability that they personally can. Hand the manuscript off, like, got the O Alquimista here. All right, I've just translated into the Alchemist. Here's the raw version. Hand it off to a copy editor or to the book publishing company, and then everyone gets their little greedy fingers into the pies and changes a lot of things. So this will typically be out of their control, I believe, depending on the relationship of what contract they drew up with the publishing company. As far as I'm aware, translators are not the most powerful of people when it comes to bargaining. Because I think they're, dare I say, dime a dozen. No translator has a renowned name for themselves, at least in general public sphere, to be able to command a exclusive rights over the copy editing process and marketing process of a book, for example. So this is where you'll typically see that companies will do things like altering passages to not incur any legal issues, whether that be related to laws of the land, related to obscenity of sexual nature, of perhaps even if you're translating in a modern context to libel laws or things like that. So, for example, the Kama Sutra book review I did recently, the Richard Burton translation of that was kind of tricky because things like Yoni and Lingsam, which he kind of kept, were not accurate descriptions, or the way that he portrayed them in the book were not as accurate as how he could have done, which should have been relating to saying things like penis and vagina, or perhaps even cruder versions of those words that you could find in English. But we have to remember this was published in, I want to say, the 1800s, maybe early 1900s, of his version of the Kama Sutra. And, he took a lot of risks to publish that, and the company did as well. So you kind of have to give him a little bit of leeway at the same time, because the book wouldn't even be published if they hadn't made certain aspects change, or perhaps it would have been published and immediately, taken off the shelves due to libel laws or obscenity laws or things like that. So those ones I'm kind of forgiving on. I still don't like corporate bureaucracy interfering with my literature, but I also accept that sometimes is the case, because I don't know how to create a book. I don't know how to bind paper onto. I don't know how to operate printing machines and things like that. So I'll take what I can get. The next is what I would say is stylistic choices, and I haven't read this version, so I will just caveat that. But one of the things that came up recently to my attention was Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey. And this came from a listener, Cole McCormick, of the show, because he was interested in a movie of the Odyssey, which by Odysseus's Odyssey, by Homer, I believe. And he was researching into it, and he found that there was a woke version of the book coming out, or had been come out, written by Emily Wilson. And she's so woke that she changed things to make men look bad and make women stronger, or whatever it was. I don't believe that's the case after diving into it a bit more. What I think was she made very intentional stylistic changes with her translation from the ancient Greek, I guess, which was she decided to write in iambic pentameter, which is, I believe, the way that Homer wrote this originally, or you'll have Shakespeare is most renowned for this style of sentence formation, I guess, or text formation. Honestly, iambic pentameter, I really have no idea how it's structured. It's related to syllables and things like that. But she wanted to keep the word length or the line length the same, which was not possible without very severe alterations, because the amount of syllables in Greek versus in English it's very much shortened in Greek and lengthened in English, which meant to keep the iambic pentameter, she had to like squish and mold and form a lot of things to fit the style of the book she was writing in. Hence why you would find certain passages where it seemed very, very different from other translations, which are perhaps more literal and to the way that it was actually written, or a more literal translation. Let's just leave it at that. And so she had to make a lot of decisions. She chose to do that. I think that's totally fine, as long as you're upfront about it and know going in, hey, this is some of the things that I do. And so you'll typically see that in a translator's note. And I think it's kind of my responsibility as the reader, if there is a translation, to read the translator's note to see what decisions they were making, because I personally find it rather fascinating. And it will give you an idea of like, okay, she made these trade-offs in this translation, because that's one thing about languages is direct translations. if you're trying to learn a language and you have any thoughts in your head, or I would say probably 50% having direct type translation ideas in your head is good. More than that, you're gonna have a problem. You're gonna have a bad time. And you'll also notice that, for example, in the Tao Te Ching, I'll also leave a link to that in the show notes down below, where in that book review, where I talked about, I had two translations of the same book. So this time it was different because I had two translations into English, and I could see very clearly how it was completely different in certain passages. One book staying more to the original Tao Te Ching language and actual words, one being more in the spirit of it. I personally actually enjoyed the book that was more in the spirit of the sense of the Tao Te Ching, because I found the other one a rather dry and academic. So there are times where you will read a book that has been translated and it's not to the utmost degree directly translated, but you will find that you enjoy it more. Now, are you losing meaning? Yes, you're making the trade-off of meaning versus enjoyment. And in a certain sense, I got more meaning from the book because I enjoyed it more. So, there was no trade-off. Everything was better for me. but these are just things to be aware of. So let's jump into the final section, just a summary here. I found that although the grammar prompts some differences, the biggest effect was the biggest effect was the actual grammar of the changes in languages between Portuguese and English, with some minor effects by the stylistic choices of the editor. And these could be minor in the certain extent that I don't think they had any change, and minor-ish where it was okay. It changed the intent of a character, and the feel of the book was a little bit different. So, larger alterations, cutting out word sentences, I didn't understand that. I'm not sure why. Also, removing the racist remarks of Santiago, even though, he was just saying he just doesn't like the Moors. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Translations in general are complex, and I think it's worthwhile, if you're reading a translated book, having a little look around at just what kind of translations are available to you, if that's a thing. Because for certain classics, for example, you're going to get multiple translations. If it's a more modern book, probably you can just choose whatever. It's not really going to make that much of a difference, but particularly ones which have like scholarly interpretations, multiple, and if it's written in an especially old language, that is really hard, because sometimes you might need to learn Arabic before you can then have a stab at learning like an ancient dialect of Arabic, and so the complexity level really notches up depending on the language that is being translated as well. If it's got a common similar root, like the Latin languages, English, French, Italian, Spanish, Romanian, they're going to be a bit easier to translate from one to the other rather than to Ukrainian or to Japanese. So I don't do this personally for every book. When there's Japanese books, Yukio Mishima, for example, I just grab whatever. It's not going to make that much of a difference in that case, but there's certain ones where I will be a little bit more picky. So, and I would encourage people to have a think about that as well. So the art of the translation, bloody damn difficult, complex, and nuanced. That's kind of my takeaway from reading these books. Value for value. This is a value for value podcast. You are never going to find advertising, sponsorships, nor things like that on this. I want this available anywhere, anytime, anyone, for any place as well. That does mean, though, that all this value is being provided up front, and it can't continue without you providing some value in return. Now, you can do this multiple different ways, in time, talent, and treasure. Time, sharing this podcast with someone, hitting the like thing, hitting the bell, subbing to the channel on the YouTube, doing all those very similar things on the audio version is very much appreciated. Talent, telling someone about this and giving me book recommendations based on what you think I would enjoy, or even on special episodes like this. What are your thoughts on translations? Have you read a book in another language? What were your observations? I would love to know these things. And reaching out via any of our social media or leaving a comment is very much appreciated and helps this channel as well. And then finally, treasure. What value did you get from this? If you had to pay for this, how much would you pay for it? And helping to support the show in a monetary form is very important as well, because this does cost a lot of time, energy, and effort on myself parts and Juan's part. And so to help do that, there is a PayPal link down below. And you can also send in a boostergram. If you go to meremortalspodcast.com/support, it'll explain what that is and how one might do that. What's coming up in some future episodes? Well, as usual, I'm live here on 11 a.m. on a Wednesday, as always for the immediate future, the next couple of months. And I have certain books coming up. I've finished The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. I have finished the Blue Ocean Strategy by two people whose names I'm probably not going to remember, because it's honestly a bit of a forgettable book, but I'll still give you the goss on the Blue Ocean Strategy. I am reading at the moment The Lucky Country by Donald Horne. That's about Australia. I'm going to read a book, either The Gilded Age or I think it's called The Price of Interest by Edward Chancellor, because I enjoyed his Devil Take the Hindmost so much. I found another one of his, and I'll be reading that. One has 2 book reviews coming up as well, I believe. One about the 48 Laws of Power, and I think he said The Diary of a CEO. Is that an actual book? I'm not sure. But something related to that. So plenty of stuff coming up on this channel. Weekly episodes released by me as usual, and then Juan with his special episodes coming out on the weekends. Get excited, get keen. And I really do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Ciao for now. Kyron out. Bye. Okay, that is Dunskies. I will stop that recording. Yep. And save that. I will jump over to here. I'll turn off the live on the podcasting apps. And here and here. I will open this window and get some fresh air coming in as well. So I will be back in a second.